Oh, my lovely native land, more dear to me than all the world. Thy sea was sun-kissed sand. Or down upon the borders, looking out upon the deep, the great Atlantic flowed into a fury, or asleep. Yet more ado, or a banter in the crimson sunset glow. I love thee. Oh, I love thee. Let us go offering for the young. Let us go offering for our land. Let us resolve to fight together. See we do it right together. Can we do it? Yes, we can.
Each man must do his bit.
Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and in this series of programs, we examine Guyana's domestic and foreign policies, all aspects of public policy, in fact. And in this program, we will be dealing with the topic Britain's royalty and African slavery. I know there are some people who believe that Black History Month is observed in February. It is an American practice. It started out because Abraham Lincoln was born in February, and many African Americans think that Abraham Lincoln was responsible for emancipating them. And of course, Frederick Douglass was also born in February. But it has taken on a particular meaning for the African Americans. I'm not an African American, I'm Guyanese. And I believe that August, the month that we're in now, should be observed as African Guyanese History Month. As you know, on the 1st of August, we observed Emancipation Day in Guyana. And that is how the month started, with the most important event in Guyanese history, the emancipation of the enslaved Africans. Prior to that, there was a revolt in Essequibo led by Damon in 1834. So that's the second reason why we should observe, African Guyanese History Month in August. And even before that, there was the Demerara Revolt in 1823 on the east coast of Demerara, where 200 Africans were shot down by the British Army on one morning. And it is something that we should never forget. So those are three good reasons. And in addition to that, the revolution in Haiti, the only successful African revolution, or the revolution of enslaved Africans in history, broke out on the 23rd of August. And the United Nations, as you may know, declared the 23rd of August, and I hope you all remember that, the 23rd of August is International Day for the remembrance of the slave trade and its abolition. So those are good reasons why all Guyanese, whether they're African or not, should observe the month of August as African History Month. Emancipation, Essequibo Revolt, Demerara Revolt, Haitian Revolution, and the United Nations declaration of the 23rd of August as International Day for the Remembrance of the Slave Trade and its abolition. So there we have it. Welcome to the program. Welcome to African Guyanese History Month. Today we look at British royal family and its involvement in African slavery over the centuries. As you know, the slavery, as we know it, is an international crime. The British Empire, which colonized us for over 200 years, the British Empire was the most notorious mercantile state in the transatlantic trade in traffic in captive Africans. Britain reaped profits from its commerce in captives for over 300 years in what is called the triangular trade. That is to say, trade between Europe, Africa, and the Americas back to Europe. Ships leaving Europe, particularly England, would carry guns and cloth and other manufactured items to Africa. That's the first leg, where they would, pick up captives through raids or purchase, and then bring them to the Americas or the Caribbean. That's the second leg. And then they would take, rum, molasses, sugar, cotton from the Americas. Don't forget that at that time, what is now United States of America was a British colony or a series of British colonies. And they would go back to Europe, to England. And that was the third leg. So it was Europe, Africa, the Americas, back to Europe. That's called the triangular trade. But over the years, of course, millions of people died in the middle passage, the passage between Africa and the Americas. Some of them were just thrown overboard during a storm. Some of them rebelled, and some of them committed suicide, because, they didn't know why they were taken from their homes and being taken to a strange country and forced to sleep and live on a boat for several weeks, packed like sardines. It was miserable. And that was the Middle Passage. So we're dealing with an international crime, trafficking in persons, the greatest crime against humanity. Britain led the way. It established the Royal African Company, and royal means royal. It was established by Britain's royalty. It's called the RAC, the Royal African Company, and it gave itself a monopoly over trade in West Africa and the West Indies. And significantly, West Africa and the West Indies are the two poorest regions in the British Empire up to the present time. And the Atlantic trade enriched the shareholders in the Royal African Company, including, of course, the royals who dominated and controlled the company. It was a company, a business enterprise. And that enterprise enjoyed royalties participation and parliamentary protection, because the British Parliament in those days protected the company's interests. So Britain's royalty supported trafficking in captives. And it is that trade which determined the character of the Caribbean, determined the composition of the Caribbean population, and determined the complexion of the people in the Caribbean, and of course the economy of the Caribbean. And British and Anglo-American ships, don't forget that the American colonies at that time, until 1776, were British. They carried millions of captives from Africa to the Americas. So we cannot separate the transatlantic trade in captive Africans from Britain or from the royal family. And in looking at royalty, the British royalty was involved in the transatlantic trade. And much of its personal wealth which has been augmented up to today, is derived from the transatlantic trade in captive Africans. Queen Elizabeth I, from one Queen Elizabeth to the present Queen Elizabeth II. Well, of course, there's no trafficking now, but that's where the money came from. It came from Queen Elizabeth I. And she was the business partner of Captain John Hawkins, who, was a slave trader. And he finally got a knighthood for his efforts, So that tells you where it started, as early as 1560, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth. She endorsed trafficking in captives. It is well known, it's historical fact, it's not guesswork. She profited from the transatlantic trade. And in fact, she actually expelled Africans who were living in England in 1596 during her reign. After her came King James I. Be careful when you read the Bible. King James I, he granted a patent to a company to trade in Africa. Then came King Charles I. He granted license to transport captives from the Guinea coast to the Americas. And when we speak of the Guinea coast, Guinea is, is an important word because it comes from a Spanish word, it comes from the Portuguese word, it comes from an Arabic word. But essentially, it means the land of black people. That's what Guinea actually means. It you know, it is not the Sahel, it is not the, you know, the northern part of Africa. It was the land of the black people, really from the Senegal River all the way down to Angola. And it was because of this, the fact that the exploitation took place among the blacks, that the British actually created a coin. And you should try to get a picture of that coin, called a guinea. Up to the time of the World Wars, there was still a guinea. It was worth 21 shilling, but it was made of pure gold. And that gold came from Africa. It came from Guinea. And the Guinea coin, of course, was very precious, as you know, in Guyana long ago, when our old folk got hold of a coin that is made of gold. They kept it, you know, to pass on to their daughters and granddaughters and so on. But that coin was made of gold, and it was called the guinea because it came from African gold. And then we had King Charles II. He granted a charter to the reorganized Royal African Company in 1672. And then the charter, the company, the Royal African Adventurers Trading into Africa, which became the Royal African Company. And the captives were actually branded DY, not tattooed, you know, branded like animals, like cattle, with hot metal brands. DY meant, you know what DY meant? It meant the Duke of York. The present Duke of York is Prince Andrew. So there had been a Duke of York for hundreds of years. But in the time of the Royal African Company, the slaves were, if you see a slave in a British barracoon being branded DY, it meant Duke of York. That was his property. And some were branded RACE, the Royal African Company of England. Significantly, that abbreviation means race, RACE. But again, the slaves or the enslaved Africans were branded DY or RAC, showing that they were property, just like you have a cow or goat or something like that. That is the way they treated human beings in those days. King James II served as governor of the Royal African Company before he was crowned. Queen Anne, she signed a treaty with Spain, which granted Britain the asiento, which is a Spanish word. It's an agreement, a license, allowing British ships to take captives to Spanish colonies. That was in 1713. She herself held a 20% stake in a company that sold captives. Then we come to King George and his sons who supported slavery. King George IV actually issued a proclamation asserting that the slave population would be undeserving of protection. And then we have William IV, the Duke of Clarence, who led a pro-slavery lobby. And very amusingly, at the time, William IV, you know, when he was a Duke, he was actually known as the Sailor Prince. And there was a cartoon in the British papers of him lying down in a hammock in the Caribbean with a very large African woman, the two of them in a hammock. So I don't know how he could say that the people were undeserving of protection, but he certainly got close to female Africans in the Caribbean. But that is the story of royalty. That is the story of royalty. It was profit, profit, profit. And emancipation and abolition never came until other forces outside of royalty undermined, you know, that awful trade, the transatlantic trade in captive Africans. Now we have a situation in the world today in which the royal family, starting with the Queen, have refused to apologize for the enslavement of Africans. Queen Elizabeth II, the present Queen, has never apologized for British royalty's involvement in the transatlantic trade. No British sovereign has ever apologized for the role of the royal family in the transatlantic trade. They have never paid a penny towards reparations for that greatest crime against humanity. Up to today, 2022, British royalty still uses fuzzy expressions when they're dealing with the transatlantic trade in captive Africans. You remember when Barbados celebrated in fact, when it became a republic, Prince Charles, who's the Duke of Cornwall, called slavery an appalling atrocity, which forever stains our history. He didn't apologize. He said it was an atrocity. Prince William, his son, who's the Duke of Cambridge, went to Jamaica. He didn't apologize. He expressed profound sorrow. And he called the practice abhorrent. It should never have happened. And then, of course, Prince Edward, who is the brother of Prince Charles, he is the Earl of Wessex. He went to Antigua. Ridiculously, when Prime Minister Gaston Brown spoke to him about reparations, you know what he said? He said, he's not keeping notes, so he won't be able to reply to each point the Prime Minister made. Oh, I mean, you couldn't try that in Form 2. And these are the answers that the British royalty have been giving when asked about reparations. No Prime Minister, no Tony Blair, no David Cameron ever apologized for slavery. And you should bear that in mind. The British royalty has never apologized for its role in the transatlantic trade in captive Africans. My friends, this is a serious matter. The wounds are deep. And let me tell you a little story about Malcolm X. He wasn't speaking particularly about slavery. He's speaking about other crimes against humanity in his own country, the United States of America. What did he say? And it is something we should try to remember, because the situation he described in the United States, got more relevance in 2020 during the murder of George Floyd and the start of, or the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. This is what Malcolm X had to say. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, that's not progress. If you pull it out all the way, that's not progress. Progress comes from healing the wound that the blow made. And we have not had progress in terms of reparations for the transatlantic trade in captive Africans. Even if the knife has been pulled out, there has been no progress in healing the wound that has been inflicted on the descendants of the greatest crime against humanity, the victims of that transatlantic trade in captive Africans. So much for Malcolm X. I think his maxim is now an axiom that pulling a knife out doesn't heal the wound. And the wounds are still open in the Caribbean to this day. British royalty refuses to admit that there is a wound. And when you hear United Nations making these declarations, and when you hear about International Decade of People of African Descent, it means that the people of African descent in the Western Hemisphere have suffered immeasurably because of the transatlantic trade in captive Africans. This is not hearsay. This is historical fact. And these measures are taken because the wounds of slavery have not healed. and it's a crime against humanity. And let me refresh your memory, those of you who are old enough, um, you might not have been aware of an incident in Westminster Abbey, which of course the Holy of Holies for the Anglican Church in Britain, on the 27th of March 2007, 15 years ago. That was a religious service being held in that Anglican cathedral to mark the bicentenary, the 200th anniversary of the abolition of the slave trade. And an activist who was properly admitted to the cathedral, he got up during the service and he walked to the front of the church where the Queen and Prince Philip and the Prime Minister Tony Blair were all sitting. And he pointed to her, "You, the Queen, should be ashamed." That is what happened in Westminster Abbey on the 27th of March 2007. So you can see people are not prepared to live with this, dodgy language by British royalty about appalling atrocity and, shameful episode. People want to know that the British royalty should put its money where its mouth is and actually use the word apology and start to pay reparations to the descendants of the victims of that great crime against humanity. Why is it they refuse to apologize? Three princes came to the Caribbean: Prince Charles, Prince William, and Prince Edward. Why the Caribbean? Why didn't they go to New Zealand? Why did they go to Sri Lanka? Why they came to the Caribbean to celebrate the Queen's anniversary or platinum anniversary on the throne? Why come to us, the victims? And having come to the victims, refuse to apologize. If you don't want to apologize, go to somewhere where they're not called to apologize. But we in the Caribbean, we in the West Indies, we in Guyana are demanding apologies for the transatlantic trade. My friends, we need to work together, all the states of the Caribbean, not necessarily as part of the Black Lives Matter movement, but that has triggered an international resentment against racism. And people who are not of African descent have used the opportunity of the murder of George Floyd to pull down statues all around the world, in Brussels against the King of Belgium, in Britain against Colson, the trader, slave trader, even Colombia against, the Spanish conquistadores. And we need to take this matter seriously. And the behavior of the three princes in the Caribbean is not, something humorous. And Prince Charles, Prince Edward, and Prince William must understand that this is not some joke about schoolboy not taking notes and can't answer that question. You know what the question is. We want the answer, and that answer is reparations. Caribbean labor has been exploited. The colonies of the Caribbean have been plundered. And you can see the state of the Caribbean. We're still among the poorest regions on earth because of the way our forefathers were treated. And the economy itself is distorted. There's no point crying about sugar. Our forefathers were brought here to cultivate sugar. Now the people who brought us here don't want to buy the sugar. So it's almost as if we've been shipwrecked by the people who moved the African people from their homeland. In the Caribbean, the British Parliament paid slave owners the largest transfer of wealth by the government to its citizens. In British history, there was never such a transfer of wealth as in 1838, in which Britain paid the slave owners for the loss of their property. And of course, the human beings got nothing, not a penny. If the labor of Africans was to be calculated, Britain would probably have to pay about 9.8 trillion US dollars in unpaid labor. And that's the reason why people like David Cameron and Tony Blair and Queen Elizabeth and Prince Charles and Prince William and Prince Edward don't want to use apologize, the word apologize, because once they use that word, it means that they'll have to pay. And with good reason, British princes faced protests when they came to Antigua, when they went to Bahamas, when they went to Belize, when they went to Jamaica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent. And thankfully, the people of Grenada said it's not convenient for you to come, for the princes to come to Grenada. And even in other islands, they said, look, we have to deal with this question of reparations. So many of us in the Caribbean may be inspired by the Black Lives Movement, but even without the Black Lives Movement, the Caribbean community, CARICOM, had actually set up a commission to demand reparations. Clearly, it was clearly mandated that Caribbean Commission was to seek reparation. So the British government knows what we want, and it's simply refusing to grant it to us. I agree with the protester in the Abbey of Westminster back in 2007. You know, the Queen should be ashamed for not granting the people of the Caribbean, you know, that apology and reparations. In all of the slave trading states, we need to maintain the pressure. In France, which still has colonies here in Guadeloupe and Martinique and French Guyana called Guyane. In the Netherlands, which had colonies there in Suriname and you know, and Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao. In Portugal, and that had a huge colony of Brazil. In Spain and all around us, the Spanish-speaking countries, Venezuela, Colombia, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, all through South America. UK, many of the islands in the Caribbean, you know, some of them still have the Union flag, you know, like Cayman Islands, Turks and Caicos, British Virgin Islands, and the USA, which controls Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands. You know. All of these countries were involved in the transatlantic trade in captive Africans, and they need to be, you know, coerced into apologizing and paying reparations to the descendants of the victims of that terrible trade. And unless that is done, we'll never overcome the problems of racism in the Western Hemisphere. We'll never overcome the problems of equal rights, human rights in the Western Hemisphere. That is the root of racism, the transatlantic trade in captive Africans. And apart from the confrontation in Westminster Abbey, we need to use every forum, as the brave people in Jamaica and Belize and Grenada have done, to make it clear to the royal family that this is not going to go away. As Malcolm X said, it's not a matter of pulling the knife out halfway or pulling the knife out full way. The question is healing, and Britain must take a step to heal the wounds caused by the transatlantic trade. Wherever British royalty goes, they must face demands for reparations. And it is no point delaying, it's no point kicking the can down the road. We need to confront the reality of our being here in the Western Hemisphere. We need to demand reparations for the greatest crime against humanity. And we need to take a decision collectively to call on Britain to expunge, you know, this great crime, expunge the sin. And what is happening, although many of us may not have been aware of the trend, it's a trend that was set by Guyana in 1970. People are getting rid of the British Queen as head of their country, and it is gathering momentum. Barbados, which was regarded as more British than Britain itself, has gotten rid of the Queen. Jamaica will go, well, Trinidad went after Guyana. Barbados is gone. Jamaica, the other countries will go. People are not only fed up with the legacy of the British Empire, they're fed up with the Queen, who is refusing to apologize to the victims or the descendants of the victims of the transatlantic trade in captive Africans. This is the price they must pay. People must wipe out memory of the British subjugation of our peoples in the Caribbean. Thank you, and may God bless you all.
Let us cooperate for the young. Let us cooperate for our land. Let us resolve to fight together. See we do it right together. Can we do it? Yes, we can.
Each man